turkey was already carved by the time I came downstairs. I remember standing at the top of the stairs for a moment, just listening. Laughter from the living room, my son-in-law's voice, loud the way it always was when he thought he was being charming. Christmas music from the little Bluetooth speaker my daughter had set up on the kitchen counter. The one she'd bought with my credit card in October and never mentioned. The table looked beautiful. I'll give her that. She had a good eye for setting a table, always did, even as a little girl, linen napkins folded into fans. The good china I'd kept since my marriage. The set her father and I had carried across 3 provinces and 2 moves. Candles in the silver holders I'd polished myself 3 days before they arrived. I had not been asked to help with any of it. I came downstairs in my cardigan and my slippers, the way I do every Christmas morning in my own house, and my daughter looked up from the stove and said, "Oh good, you're up. We already started the gravy." She and her husband. In my kitchen, with my Le Creuset pot, I'd told her twice not to use on high heat. I said good morning and poured myself a coffee and stood near the window looking out at the backyard. The bird feeder needed filling. I made a note of it in my head, the way I make notes of small things when I don't want to think about the larger ones. My grandson came running in then, just turned 4, and that part was good. That part was always good. He wrapped himself around my leg and I leaned down and breathed him in. And for a moment everything felt the way Christmas is supposed to feel. Warm, simple, safe. I did not know yet what was sitting in the drawer of my home office desk. We sat down to eat around noon. My daughter had made everything from scratch. She kept saying so. And it was good, I won't pretend it wasn't. But there was a moment early in the meal when she asked me to pass the rolls and then passed them directly to her husband without taking one herself. And I noticed that the dish had 6 rolls on it, and there were 4 of us at the table, plus the little one who didn't eat bread yet, and I did the quiet arithmetic of that without saying anything. My son-in-law talked through most of the meal. He was telling a story about something that had happened at his company's year-end party, a story that required a lot of context and kept circling back on itself. And my daughter laughed at the right moments, the way you laugh when you've already heard a story, but you're performing enjoyment for someone else's benefit. I watched her do it, and I thought about when she was 17 and used to make that same face when I would repeat a concern I'd already raised once, and I felt something shift in my chest that I couldn't quite name. After dinner, when my son-in-law had settled himself in front of the television and my grandson was napping upstairs and my daughter was in the kitchen ostensibly cleaning up, I went to my office. I went to look for a pen. That's all it was. I opened the middle drawer and I didn't find a pen because the drawer wasn't where I'd left it. Things had been moved, shifted around, the way someone moves things when they're looking for something. And underneath a folder I hadn't placed there myself, I found a form I recognized immediately. I spent 31 years working in financial services administration. I know what a continuing power of attorney for property looks like. I know the language, I know the boxes, I know what it means when someone's name is pre-filled at the top and a different name is written in the line that says, "I appoint." My name was at the top. My daughter's name was on the line. There was a post-it note on the inside of the folder in my son-in-law's handwriting. It said, "Just needs her signature. Keep it casual." Below that, a date, 2 days after Christmas. I stood in my office for a long time. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because I think sometimes people assume a woman my age would cry at something like this, would crumple, would go weak at the knees. I'm 67 years old. I raised 2 children on my own after their father left. I managed the estate when my mother passed, sorted through 40 years of a life, and made the hard calls with no one standing beside me telling me it was all right. I know what it means to be the person in the room who keeps things together. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I went to the bathroom and washed my hands and face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Just a moment, and then I went back out to the kitchen and offered to help with the dishes. My daughter said, "No, you rest, we've got it." We again. I dried 3 serving bowls anyway and put them away in the right cupboards, while she talked about the renovation they were planning for their bathroom, the kind of renovation that requires taking out a wall and putting in a heated floor. The kind of renovation that costs the kind of money I know for a fact they do not have. She mentioned, while rinsing the gravy pot, that they'd been talking to a financial advisor. I said, "Oh," she said, "just about planning. Future stuff. You know how it is." And then she smiled at me. And it was such a practiced smile, so smooth and so warm and so completely without guilt, that I had to turn away and fold a dish towel very carefully so that my hands had something to do. That night, after they'd all gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and my reading glasses, and I thought about what I knew. I knew that my daughter and her husband were in debt. I had suspected it for 2 years and confirmed it 8 months ago, when she called me from a grocery store parking lot and asked if she could borrow $400 until the end of the month. I'd sent it. She'd paid back $250 and never mentioned the rest. I knew that my son-in-law had been passed over for a promotion at his firm the previous spring. He hadn't told me. She had in a phone call that started as being about something else, and I'd heard in her voice the way she was trying to frame it as temporary, minor, a stepping stone to something better, the way you talk about things when you're convincing yourself as much as the person you're talking to. I knew that my house was paid off. I knew that my pension from my years at the firm was steady and sufficient, and that I also had savings I had been careful with for a very long time. I knew that my daughter had asked me twice in the past year whether I'd ever thought about moving somewhere smaller, and both times, when I'd said I like my house, thank you, she'd let the subject drop just a little too quickly, the way you drop a subject when you're filing it away rather than letting it go. And now I knew about the folder. I did not sleep much that night. I lay in the dark listening to the house. It's a 1960s bungalow in a quiet part of Oakville, solid and a little drafty in December, and it makes sounds at night, settling sounds, familiar sounds, and I thought about what I was going to do. I am not impulsive. I never have been. When her father left, I waited 6 weeks before I called a lawyer because I wanted to be sure I understood the full picture before I started moving pieces. My mother used to say that I was the kind of woman who reads the instruction manual before she puts anything together, and she meant it as a slight. But I took it as a compliment, because the people who read the instruction manual are the ones whose furniture doesn't wobble. I decided I would not say anything. Not yet. I decided I would gather information. The day after Christmas, when my son-in-law took my grandson to the park and my daughter was upstairs on a call, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I called my bank. I had a joint account with my daughter. We'd opened it years ago when her father first left, and I'd wanted her to have access to something in case of emergency. She was 17 then. She was 38 now, and I realized, sitting on hold listening to instrumental versions of songs I used to know the words to, that I had never once thought about closing it. I asked the customer service representative to explain to me exactly what access my daughter had to that account. The answer was complete. She could withdraw. She could transfer. She was listed as a joint account holder, not a beneficiary, which means she didn't have to wait for anything. She had the same right to that money as I did. I also asked, while I had her on the line, whether there were any recent transactions I should know about. There were 3 transfers in November, totaling $1,800. The notes on the transfers said Household Holiday MISC. I had not made those transfers. I asked how to remove a joint account holder. The representative walked me through it. It required my identification and a visit to the branch. It did not require my daughter's consent. I wrote down everything she told me on a yellow legal pad and underlined the parts that mattered. That afternoon I also called my lawyer. I have used the same firm in Burlington for 15 years, a woman I trust completely, the kind of lawyer who does not add drama to things and does not charge you for reassurance. I left a message. She called me back within the hour. I told her about the form. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Have you signed anything?" I said no. She said, good, don't. And then she told me to come in on the 27th. My daughter and her husband left on the 28th. We had 2 more days together after that phone call, and I want to be honest about what those days were like, because I think it's important to say that it was not easy. It was not a matter of going cold, of switching off, whatever I feel for her. I am her mother. I changed her diapers. I drove her to school for 11 years because she got carsick on the bus. I sat in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours when she delivered her son, and when they brought him out to me, this small wrinkled person, wrapped in a striped blanket, I held him and cried, the way you cry when something adds itself to the list of things you would do anything for. The love was not the question. The love was never the question. What was in question was whether I was going to let that love be used as a door left unlocked. We ate leftovers on the 27th and watched a movie my son-in-law chose and put the little one to bed together, and it was all perfectly normal. And the whole time I was watching my daughter, I was thinking about the post-it note in her husband's handwriting, and I was trying to find in her face some evidence that she felt badly about it, some flicker of something. I did not find it. She hugged me goodbye on the 28th. A long hug, the kind she gives when she wants something or has just gotten it. And she said, "Thank you for everything, Mum. It was really nice." And I held her back and I said it was good to see them, and I kissed my grandson 4 times and watched them load the car and pull out of the driveway. Then I went inside and made myself a pot of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I spent the next 4 days doing what I should have done. Honestly, years ago. I went to the bank first. I brought my identification and my lawyer's card, and I was very pleasant with the branch manager, a young man who seemed slightly nervous about the whole conversation, and I removed my daughter from the joint account, and I transferred the balance into a new account in my name only. I also changed the login credentials for my online banking and set up 2-factor authentication, which my son's friend had told me about 2 years ago and which I had been meaning to do ever since. I met with my lawyer on the 27th as planned, and then again on the 31st. I updated my will. I reviewed and signed a continuing power of attorney for property, the real one, done properly, witnessed with my lawyer as one of the witnesses, naming my nephew in Nova Scotia, who is a methodical and honest person with no financial interest in when I die. I also put together a statement of competency letter with my doctor, because my lawyer mentioned it was increasingly common, and I thought, if someone is going to try to make an argument about my capacity, I want there to be paperwork. I cancelled the supplementary credit card my daughter had on my account. She had used it 3 times since October. I had not noticed until I looked. I noticed now. I called her in January. It was a Tuesday, the kind of January Tuesday in Ontario that is grey in a way that feels personal, and I called her in the morning when I knew her husband would be at work. She answered on the 2nd ring. I told her that I had found the form. She was quiet for a long time. I did not fill the silence. I am 67 years old, and I have had a great deal of practice not filling silences. When she finally spoke, she said it wasn't what it looked like, that he had printed it off just to have information, just to understand the options, that they had talked about it together, and she was going to bring it up with me. They were going to have a conversation about planning for the future, about making sure I was protected. I said, a post-it note that says keep it casual is not a plan to protect me. She went quiet again. I told her about the joint account. I told her about the 3 transfers in November. I told her that I had made adjustments and that going forward, my finances were my business. She said, "Mum, we're family." I said, "Yes. And in families people ask before they take." She cried then. Real tears, I think, not performed ones. I know the difference after 38 years. She said she was sorry. She said things had been really hard and she should have come to me instead of letting him handle it his way. And she said she knew it wasn't right and she was ashamed. I believed her. She was ashamed. I also believed that shame without consequence is just a feeling. and that feelings, however genuine, don't refill a bank account. I said, I hear you, and I love you, and this conversation is the one we needed to have, and now we've had it. I told her I wanted to see my grandson on his birthday in March, and that she was welcome to call whenever she wanted to talk. I told her I was not interested in punishing her, but I also told her that my house, my pension, my savings, and my legal documents were now in order, and that they would remain in order, and that if she wanted to be part of my life, she was welcome, truly welcome, but that my life was mine to manage. She said, I know that, Mum. I said, I needed to make sure you knew. We hung up, and I sat for a moment at the kitchen table. Outside, the bird feeder was swinging a little in the wind. I had filled it the week before, finally, and a pair of chickadees were making use of it, taking turns in the efficient way they do, as though they've worked out a schedule. I watched them for a while. Then I got up, rinsed my coffee cup, and put on my coat to go for a walk. The sidewalks were icy but manageable if you paid attention, and I had learned a long time ago that you can walk on ice in January if you just slow down and stop expecting the ground to hold you the way it does in summer. It doesn't need to be summer to get somewhere. I keep thinking about that bird feeder. I had noticed it needed filling on Christmas morning, right in the middle of everything, while the gravy was being made in my kitchen by someone else, and the good china was on my table set by someone else's hands, and I filed it away the way I file away small things when the larger ones are too heavy to look at directly. It took me a week to fill it, but I did fill it, and the chickadees came back. I don't think what happened to me was unusual. I think it happens in a lot of families, quietly, incrementally, the way a room gets clattered, not all at once, but one thing set down in the wrong place, then another, until one day you look around and you don't recognize it anymore. My daughter didn't become someone who transfers money without asking overnight. I didn't become someone who looked the other way overnight either. These things build. That's the part I had to sit with honestly, and it wasn't comfortable. What I know now at 67 is that the consequences we live with are almost always the result of choices that seemed small at the time. I gave access because I trusted. I didn't revisit that access for 20 years because the situation had never been uncomfortable enough to force me to. And my daughter. I do believe she loves me. I have never stopped believing that. Learned somewhere along the way that love in our family came with open doors. That was something we built together, her and I, over decades. The reckoning in January wasn't just about a folder in a drawer. It was about a pattern neither of us had named. There's something I've come to think of as the difference between being good and being clear. I was always trying to be good, easy to reach, easy to help, available. What I wasn't was clear about where I ended and where my responsibility for her life ended, clear about the fact that my home, my savings, my name on a legal document, these were not shared resources just because we shared blood. Being clear isn't the same as being cold. I learned that late, but I learned it. And then there's the matter of doing the hard thing without waiting for the right moment. I went to the bank alone. I called my lawyer from my kitchen while my daughter was upstairs on a call. I did not wait until I felt ready, because I knew that feeling ready was a thing I could wait for indefinitely. I think that's what courage actually looks like in a life like mine. Not dramatic, not loud, just one phone call made before the fear could talk me out of it. I heard from my daughter in February. We talked for a long time. It was not an easy call, but it was a real one, the kind we hadn't had in years. And when I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for longer than I'd admitted. The chickadees were at the feeder again. Some things only come back after you've done the work to be ready for them.